Good evening.
Just going to share this to our Tribe community Facebook group. There we go. There you go, guys. Yeah. Okay. Coolies, we're ready to go.
So, we're in day 14, my goodness.
Wow.
Second last day. So, we're 4 days through talking about like how do we make important shit happen. And we've been talking a lot about how do we create structures that help us live our values, and how do we not kind of lose sight of the structures when they start to deviate from actually being the structures that are going to be the ones that add value for us and have us living our values, because they very easily do start to deviate. And how do we create these structures in such a way that it helps us actually be in flow, so that we're not kind of taken out of the moment because of the structures in a way, or kind of lost in the dissonance of them when they're not actually in reality, such that we can kind of live our values a lot more in the moment. And we've also talked about the importance of paying attention to the signals of when those structures are kind of not right, where we might be in overwhelm and we need to do more planning, or we actually aren't being in integrity, and something, either we're not actually properly living the structure, which is most common, or the structure itself is somehow not in integrity with how we want to be living. So we're kind of getting a bit more into the specifics of how do we manage ourselves in all of this. So our topic today is around how do we resource ourselves, and it's, I think, so common that we feel under-resourced. I know that I certainly have felt that a lot, particularly being in a pretty intense corporate job and parenting at the same time and trying to juggle having a social life and studying and having a relationship. And I think it's so easy just to feel super, super stretched, and I've gone through periods of just like feeling so tired, and just like so strung out. And it can be really hard kind of being in those periods of depletion. And then also when we're actually facing adversity in our circumstances, well, that kind of adds another weight on top of that again. We've got challenges within our relationships or our jobs, like when I went through my kind of divorce a number of years ago, I remember just being so heartbroken, and it was just like so hard to like keep doing day-to-day life when I'm just like so intensely in all of this heartbreak, and so kind of, suffering is part of being alive. We kind of go through those periods of suffering, and how do we kind of cope with that, and what are our coping strategies, and what do we do to resource ourselves. And I think so many of us use kind of numbing type coping strategies. Like I know I certainly do. And I think there's actually a place for those types of coping strategies. So ideally we're conscious about it, so I'm like, okay, mental note, I'm doing something right now to numb myself a little bit. And, I need to kind of just be aware of how much I'm doing that so that I'm not going to take myself into some kind of hole through the process of doing that. But of course, ideally, the strategies in which we resource ourselves are ones which instead having us feel ourselves more deeply, so that we're digesting the challenging emotions and that we're connecting with what is of value to us, and this has been a theme through these 5 days, right? Remember what's important to us. It's so important to remember. So let me pause there and just see if you want to kind of add anything to the overall framing and context here.
Yeah, I think just on the point there around the numbing piece, I, from a parts work perspective, when those parts of us come in to try and save the day, because in some way, like there's parts of us that are perceiving that we're in some kind of emergency or what we've been doing isn't working. And I think that many people can get really alarmed by those parts of themselves. And I don't think that it's useful to try and stop them. I don't think it's useful to shame them. I don't think it's useful to try and control them either. I think that what I've certainly known in myself, and I see when I work with people around these particular parts, just to know that they're necessary at some level until we have a different structure underneath that would mean that they don't need to be there anymore. And so, for example, I know a good deal of smokers who just so wanted to stop and would white knuckle it to try and stop. And actually, once they had these self structures underneath that were having them do that in the first place, then the thing just drops away, right? Like, it's more of what we've been talking about in terms of self-esteem. Like when something moves past just you know what, I'm going to numb tonight, I'm done, versus like a continual pattern of numbing for a period of time. I said last night or the night before, like when our self-esteem is low, we don't actually want to do things that are good for us. It feels good to do things that aren't good for us when our esteem is low, actually. So yeah, working on what are those things that actually would have us having a stronger self-structure. Like, what are the things that are happening underneath that would have us doing those things? Overreading, numbing on series for long periods of time on television, like drinking too much, etc., etc. You know what I'm talking about. Tending to the structures that are underneath, or the lack of structure that's underneath, the drivers of those things, long term, much more beneficial than trying to just control those habits themselves. Like, they're arising for a reason, and they, I think that kind of having a lot of care and compassion for ourselves when that's happening, I think is a better way through than white knuckling.
Yeah. Like, there's a way in which if we're really struggling and feeling really depleted, and we're kind of just falling into these kind of maladaptive coping strategies, numbing type things, ideally the first port of call is to slow down and do the down regulation type practices, and then to kind of be with ourselves in that spot. And I know for me, if I've been pushing super hard and I'm feeling really strung out, I actually tend to go into grief. There's like a grief connected to that forcing, but it's a grief that's kind of very backgrounded because I've just been pushing so hard. And I quite often need to actually properly feel that grief. I need to sit with myself and go, oh, yeah, right, you've been going so hard, and like I understand that it's like just, being so intense, and I can almost like feel a little bit shaky when I'm like that. And I just need to like properly attune to that place in myself, kind of be going at the same kind of speed, which is generally a lot slower. And the part of me that's kind of been railroaded from all the forcing, just kind of needs to be held in a kind of a loving embrace inside of me, So,
Perfect.
So I think kind of that's in a way what will then have us, when we're in attunement with that part of ourselves, actually naturally want to start to enact healthy type of self-care and resource ourselves there. Yeah.
If that work sounds interesting to you and like resonates for you, parts work is just brilliant, really, for that. Internal family systems parts work is just, I think, is so rich. We're doing a self-leadership course. It's a 5-week course in August. There's other avenues to do that work, but I think it's beautiful work to be able to help to identify in an embodied way what is the part of us that's underneath, that's actually needing attunement. I love that you brought up attunement, because that's exactly what it's about. It's actually that other part's come in to kind of try and put out the fire, whatever the fire is, because the other parts that were trying to save the day, they were failing, those parts that were pushing really hard, and actually it's the one that's all the way underneath that really needs the attunement and the care, and then numbing out isn't necessary anymore, you know, because that one that's feeling really like out of control doesn't actually feel out of control anymore. And then you're not going to be pushing hard like you were before because you're actually attuned to yourself. So yeah, if that work like resonates for you or you're curious about it, internal family systems is brilliant.
The bomb.
It's the bomb. It's thebomb.com. We do have a course that we're starting actually this weekend called Express Your Essence, which is a lot about looking at our parts and where aspects of us are kind of in dissonance with the thing that we're really wanting for ourselves. So the vision for the 2 weeks is actually looking forward. What is it that we're really wanting? Where is it that we really want to be? Like if we were fully living how we want to be living, like what really lights us up, and getting like the vision of that, but then also feeling where we're in dissonance with that, which is so important. You know, where am I now and where do I want to be? It'll create dissonance, and dissonance, as we've said in previous lives, is so good. It's like that's where the fodder is. And through doing parts work and other work that we do in that course, we have an embodied resolution experience or an embodied healing or embodied revelations. Super rich. So again, that's something actually that's starting pretty soon if this kind of thing resonates for you. Sorry.
Sweet.
Keep going.
Yeah, come and do the stuff. That's so good. So let's get a bit more kind of practical around like looking at our resources. So we're framed values along the way, one of the frames, as how we choose to spend our resources. You know, like our resources are precious, right? And so we want to be kind of careful about how we utilize those resources, you know, so that we're utilizing them towards things that are, you know, really valuable and important. So, well, what are those resources? You know, at a basic level, I think time is a really important resource. I think our attention is a really important resource.
Yeah.
I think our energy, you know, is a really important resource. And by energy, I mean, you know, like how, you know, the things that go into energy is how well do we sleep and how well are we eating. So the things that have us actually feeling vital and alive and actually be able to kind of engage and, you know, feel like we can make things happen, so on. Of course, money is a resource, so our finances. Our relationships are resources to us, depending on the quality of the relationships, you know, and how much we feel like we come out of those interactions feeling like nourished and fulfilled. Like sometimes our relationships can actually take away from us. And of course, sometimes our relationships can go through periods of being in various states. So like paying attention to all these things, I think is like really super important, and understanding where like if circumstances, situations, people, habits will actually kind of squander our resources, you know. So attention is a really classic one. It's so easy to kind of get distracted by notifications and, you know, go into multitasking because, like, of course, context switching is actually not good for us. You know, research is super clear on this, you know. So it's actually, we've talked about Pomodoros where we kind of, you just focus on one thing for 25 minutes at a time. So, so single tasking is like a really great way of managing our attention as a resource kind of with care and not squandering our attention.
Something that I think many people don't necessarily recognize that can lead to feeling under-resourced is actually too much pleasure. Like too much self-care. And like, I'm saying self-care because it might start off as that, but then too much of that. Actually, I talked about the polarities the other day between pleasure and extension. And that if we spend too much time over here, that it actually becomes expensive. Like there's not, it's like when you overeat. Like eating's important, and actually eating a good amount of food is really important. It keeps the fire, if you imagine our belly, it keeps the fire going. But if you overeat, it's like it puts the fire out. And it's the same with pleasure, with what could start out as self-care actually becoming like gluttony. And there's a way that I think I actually see that quite a bit in kind of self-care community, like communities where there's a lot of self-care, self-pleasure,
Too much self.
You never have too much self with a capital S if we're talking about IFS, but yeah. Like too much kind of doing me and not enough actually where I'm feeling extended, where I'm feeling challenged, where I'm feeling challenged. And so, yeah, we can actually squander our resources from what we've sort of earned in our bank account. Like I'm talking about like our energy bank account, our grace bank account, where we've perhaps gone through this period of time of like really being extended. And then we go, oh, you know what? Now I deserve pleasure. And you do. And listen to that. And learning when you've gone too far or right before that is really important, in the same way that like maybe you've got a really favorite ice cream. I know I do. And if like there's a certain amount of spoons that I'll have where it's so freaking good and it's like, and then there's one spoon that I go over and it actually just doesn't taste that good anymore, you know? It's like that. So it's like getting, like being able to feel in your body vehicle when you've gone past that point of like, to like you've gone too far and it's not generative anymore. And then it actually becomes expensive. So I just wanted to flag that because I do think actually quite a lot of our listeners are people who are really interested in self-care, who've perhaps like you left the corporate world and now have their own businesses and are juggling this polarity of like working and self-care and like how to find the balance. And it's important, guys, to be extended. Like I can't tell you how generative it actually is for us to be at the right level of extension. It's really important. So like going on a constant holiday, you know, and like this kind of laptop life that you see lots of people living, it's not necessarily, if that person is not living in extension, I wouldn't want it. It's actually expensive.
Yeah. Like so much of it, I think, keeps coming back to this like self-attunement piece. Like, am I listening to myself well enough to know that point where it was the right amount of pleasure, you know, versus extension? And this is kind of what self-leadership is about, right? How do I be in relationship to myself and be inside my experience, but kind of from that relationship have a sense of like, how do I hold boundaries for myself, and where do I say no, and where do I kind of shift direction?
Have containment. And when have certain parts actually taken over that are now in avoidance, you know, that are now actually in some type of fear, resistance to the thing that we really value. Like that's an art form and it's a practice. But just having that distinction and then turning your attention to even looking for that is a really good place to start. Yeah.
And I actually think also back to the regulation content we went through, and we talked about kind of coherence as part of regulation, a coherent regulation. And you can actually measure the coherence of the heart, which is where my heart is consistently speeding up and slowing down in a really kind of nice sine wave type of pattern. And literally the power spectra of the heart is actually way more powerful. My heart is now, rather than it kind of having scattered energy because it's kind of beating at all kinds of chaotic paces, that consistency actually saves kind of energy in a sense, right? So, you know, there's this kind of way in which if we want to manage our resources well, learning to regulate ourselves, you know, and have that sense of coherence so that we're not squandering kind of all of the energy of our biology, you know, makes a massive difference. And then I think the same applies at this kind of parts level, which is what we're talking about. So just immediately kind of biological coherence, as well as having a well-integrated self system, because I'm listening to the different voices inside of myself and actually integrating them into a larger whole, will immediately have me way more resource just generally. Yeah. So the last piece that I wanted to touch on is that I think it can be hard when we have a lot of adversity around us, and not just adversity, but also a lot of kind of negative messaging. You know, we're constantly bombarded by negativity with the news and just stuff on social media, you know, and kind of it can all just feel so overwhelming and tense, you know, and it can be really easy to kind of start to lose ourselves in all of those narratives around us. And of course, that's important stuff to pay attention to. I think it's important to know what's going on in the world, but to lose ourselves in that, I think, is a real danger. And I think it's really important that we have practices that help us cultivate like light from the inside, you know, connect us to inner inspiration and the sense of goodness that exists just in human beings and around us. And
we're not talking about a positivity bias here, by the way. I just really want to make sure about that. This is not about like always feeling our light. There we go. This is not about always trying to like, not that we're preferencing light here and always feeling our positivity and flipping statements so that they like, you know, in positive reframes. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about like, how do you actually have a good boundary system such that things can be going on outside here that's real and true for many people. Maybe not if it's fake news, but there's a lot going on out here, and even fake news, that's important data for me to understand. It's not about, we're not saying like unplug from that stuff, like actually staying in reality about what's really going on is super important to keep you in reality, and being able to have a good boundary system such that you're able to stay in connection with your essence, with your heart, with your truth, with that which lights you up, with your innocence, right? And that means also having all the feelings that you're going to have, which is about being human, right? We're not preferencing particular feeling states here.
Yeah. And knowing how to go inside to kind of find those places and self-generate them. You know, in the Express Your Essence course that we're about to run, we do a lot of imaginal work, if I imagine and activate my senses of a place that feels nourishing to me. It might be a beautiful nature kind of place, you know, and or it might be a memory. Like, for example, for me, my mum would like give me tickles, you know, when I was a child going to bed each night and have my hair stroked, and I can actually activate those, like in my imagination, those experiences, and doing that is a massive resource for me, because it helps me. It's a way of regulating myself, and it's a way of kind of on the inside finding the places that have me just feeling a sense of beauty, you know, and a sense of goodness inside of myself, and knowing how to do that, knowing how to find those places inside of us, and using it as a way to kind of create energy from the inside, so that we're not just lost and, like Prem was saying, kind of not have the good boundaries. So firstly having the boundaries, but then on the inside, what am I doing with myself to kind of create that sacred space inside of me that I'm operating out of? And I think it's so important to have consistent practice of creating that inner sanctuary, that inner environment, and working on that inner environment so that we feel serenity and reverence and peace.
You just said something that feels so important to point to, which was that I was focusing on the when there's, what about like when there's adversity happening out there, yeah, and having boundaries. But what I just heard you pointing to is actually, and when you were talking about how the memory and reigniting that, reactivating that memory and really feeling the memory of what you would feel when your mum would stroke your hair, and all the feelings that would bring for you in your body. What I heard you talking about then is like you're taking care of what you said, the inner sanctuary, and it had me thinking about like when there's the adversity of what's happening on the inside, we're not actually aware of the subconscious content that's floating around inside of not just our mind, but that our neural circuitry is fully firing because of, right? So like maybe there's a tightness in my stomach and my jaw, but I'm not even present to it, right? I just live with it as if it's normal, but my body is in kind of all these reactions to stuff that's happening back here in my subconscious. I mean, that is what so much of our health and well-being, right, is driven by. Yeah. Okay. So to ensure, what I really heard from what you were saying is to like, we need to actually, I don't even know if match is the right word, but ensure that we are having whatever it is, particular practices or rituals or things that we do that create a messaging inside, a neural firing that feels soothing, safe, that opening, inspiring, connected, like, and that's really subtle work. Like what you were just pointing to, you know, some people would be like, yeah, you know, but like, I mean, I used to do these meditations where they would say, imagine a peaceful place. And I'd be like, yeah, whatever, let's get to that actual, like, important content here. Like, quit your wishy-washy BS, you know? But now that I understand the imaginal work from all the things that you taught me that we now do in Express Your Essence, I really understand how actually imagining things and feeling the impact of what I'm imagining and allowing my body to have a reaction to it is what is happening all the time anyway. It's just I'm choosing what content I'm giving my body to kind of do whatever it is that I want my body to have the experience of. And so when there's adversity out there or in here, to be able to, I don't want to use the word combat, what's a better word? Like to be able to meet it, or to like meet it with these kind of attuned strokes. And to know how to do that is like more part of being self-led.
Yes.
Which is why Express Your Essence is actually, you know, the content that we teach in it, we've now made it prerequisite for the self-leadership course, because it teaches so much about attuning in such subtle ways to our subconscious and kind of how to do all that sort of psychic, subtle surgery. Yeah.
Well, something that I think is so important to kind of realize on your journey is that we actually have incredible resources on the inside, you know, and they're there kind of just waiting for us in a way, you know, and it's not just resources that help us kind of be, you know, beautiful in a landscape, but there's inner guidance there, and there's really vast kind of knowing, you know, and places of just feeling such beautiful divine unity with all of life, and that itself is so fills us up so much,
and like precise clarity that no therapist, psychic, whoever it might be that you go to on the outside to kind of help you get the clarity perhaps that you're wanting, like such precise clarity in ways that I could never have made up with my own mind, that come from deep inside, that have us be resourced. Yeah.
Sweet. I think that's probably pretty good.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us and watching tonight. Wow, we're on day 14 of 15 days. Woo! All right. Well, we hope that you're here with us tomorrow night for our final night of the 15-day series. It's been such an awesome ride. All of these are uploaded to YouTube. All the practices that we've paired with each day are also in YouTube. There's some pretty good practices in there. So visit our YouTube channel. That's Triibe.Earth. And yeah, get stuck into those practices. We'll see you tomorrow night, guys.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.